Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and I just read my entire Lords of the Fallen review before I realised I hadn't hit the record button, because I'm smart. But this is, as you've probably guessed, my Lords of the Fallen review. Not Lords of the Fallen, but Lords of the Fallen. Not the 2014 version, although I have a review of that on the channel as well. No, we're looking at the 2023 version. This is not a sponsored video. I did not receive a review code or compensation or anything like that for this product. For a quick recap, I despised the original Lords of the Fallen. I think it is everything bad with Souls clones, and even taking that out of the equation, it's just a bad game. See, the original Lords of the Fallen copied things from Dark Souls just because they were in Dark Souls. There was no gameplay nor lore reasoning for those aspects to be present, such as reviving at bonfires, and having your healing items regenerate and all that. It just made no sense. Outside of that, the original game just felt awful to play. So how is this not sequel, sort of reboot? Well, we'll break it down to the good and the bad. And I know people have been very curious about this game in context, or rather, relation with another Souls clone that came out very recently, Lies of P, which I awarded a score of around 6.5, 7 out of 10, shall we say. How does this one stack up? We'll start with the good. Lords of the Fallen is a definite improvement on Lords of the Fallen. We'll call that one Lords 14. Big criticism of the original, as mentioned, was how Souls mechanics and gameplay elements had no justification for their presence. Lords 23 has improved upon that. For example, your character is able to revive and respawn thanks to a magical lamp that grants them immortality, effectively. This lamp actually plays a role in the story and the gameplay outside of that, so, it actually makes sense this time. It is used to travel between two different worlds, and it also grants the bearer, effectively, immortality. But yes, you can go between the real world, and at any time you can hold up the lamp and you can look at the spooky world, and then you can enter the spooky world as well. If a path is blocked to you in the real world, you can head into the spooky world to progress. However, in the spooky world, there are more enemies, and a constant looming threat of Super Satan showing up to violate you, effectively giving you a time limit, and a constant stream of spawning enemies on top of that. So that's one area they've improved over the original. Another would be the game's aesthetic. The original game was ugly to look at, quite frankly. In terms of, graphics, it was fine for the time, but it was a pretty bland and generic game that was kind of World of Warcraft meets Dark Souls, in all the worst ways. Lords 23 it's still generic, but things are more interesting and pleasing to look at. There's some cool armor sets, some cool weapons, some nice environments and vistas to stop and look at. Stop and go, that's where I came from, that's where I'm going. This sort of Souls Vista, you could call it. And on the graphical side of things, I think this is the first Unreal Engine 5 game I've played, so I'm sure they are taking advantage of all manner of things like lumen, nanite, lanite, and numen. The game world is hyper detailed and hyper dense with things, and they don't do a Resident Evil 4 remake and make some things that are interactable yellow, which I really hated that in Resident Evil 4 remake. I understand the justification for it, because the world is hyper detailed. How do you know what you can interact with and what you can't? But for the most part, I don't think it's a problem. I wasn't often in Lords of the Fallen going, why can't I do something with this thing, There was the occasional door that was there just for decoration, but again, it's not a big issue if you ask me. Another big win over Lords 14 is that Lords 23 has co-op. I think it was described as seamless, isn't perhaps the word I would use, but it's relatively painless. Effectively, when you reach a legally distinct bonfire known as Vestiges or something in this game, you can summon another player. You can beckon them at random, or you can invite a friend. You can also search for people to invade, or, be summoned by. I didn't indulge in any PvP. I can count on one hand the number of times I was invaded. And keep in mind, I was playing the game effectively twice. Once in my world, once in my friend's world. And invaders were very, very rare. And the PvP felt really bad because of the game's netcode. not being up for that sort of precision. However, when you have a summon, they will remain in your world until you kick them or they leave, so you can play together as much as you like. If you die, you'll respawn, they'll come with. If the summon player dies, you can pick them up using one of your Estus, or well, not your Estus, your Sang... I don't know, I don't even... It's just Estus. Or you can respawn them at a bonfire. Moving on though, there's things like armor dies, I think they're called tincts in this game. You pick them up and they're infinite use, and you can apply it to your different armor parts, you know, your hat, your boots, your chest plate, and so on. Makes it pretty easy to mix and match different pieces from different sets. That's a really nice feature, one that Dark Souls has needed for a long time. My only complaint is that each tinct is made up of 3 colours. It's more like a Destiny shader, you might say, if you're familiar with those. So you're not able to really fine-tune it, but generally speaking, it's a nice system, and I wish they would put it in the Souls games, really. I've been asking for that for probably 10 years. And the game has some interesting combat and melee options. You have a ranged slot. You can either have a catalyst in there for casting spells, you can have your hand in there for throwing things like javelins, grenades, you name it, or you can put like a bow or a crossbow in there. This operates on an ammo system or a magic system. You know, you can have your catalyst in there and have magic, or you can have your hand or a bow and it will work on ammo. And ammo is replenished at bonfires, or you can use items to replenish it, like consumables. This is a pretty cool way of doing things, and I'm a fan of that. And there's, you know, like rings and amulets that you can pick up to boost your effectiveness with these playstyles. And much like a Souls game, you can one-hand or two-hand your weapon. And you can swap between that mid-combo, so you can take a two-handed swing, then swap to a one-handed swing, or dual-wielding if you're not using a shield. And this is probably the only Souls game or Souls clone I can think of where I've never used a shield. I ditched the shield in this game immediately, because iframes on rolls are incredibly strong, which actually isn't something I think is good game design. I don't like how the Souls games have all become roll spam. I prefer how Demon Souls and Dark Souls did it, where, you know, fat rolling and blocking was pretty viable. Using things like poise and hyper armor were a lot more viable than just spam roll through everything all the time. But honestly, that's about it for positives. And if we're going into the negatives, there are smaller things like user interface elements, like when you go to teleport, for example. It gives you a picture and a name of where you want to teleport to, but sometimes it's really hard to tell where you're going, because a lot of the pictures kind of look the same, and trying to remember the names are... Well, it can be kind of hard when it's like, oh, do I want to go to the vestige of Lost Johnny or the vestige of Betrayed Maxwell? I don't know, I guess I'll go to both and hope I went to the right one. And people give Dark Souls... Well, it became like a meme that Dark Souls is really obtuse, like, oh, what is this meant to do? But in Dark Souls, if you go into your character screen and press help, you can go over things and it will tell you what they do. Lords of the Fallen does not have anything like that. So if you have 2 status ailments, Burn and Ignite, and you want to know the difference, well, good luck. But those are small things, really, that don't hamper my enjoyment, even if I think they're a bit questionable. But there's a big thing that does hamper my enjoyment. A lot. Lords 23 does not feel good to play. Superficially, it's very much like a Souls game, right? You can perfect guard, which is kind of like a parry. You can break an enemy's posture so that you can do a critical attack. You can chain light and heavies with the shoulder or trigger buttons. You can iframe dodge. And, you know, weapons will scale like, you know, A with agility, B with strength, stuff like that. Everything will be very familiar if you've played any Souls game. And yet, goodness me, this game's animations are so disconnected from what is actually happening. Here's a way I can think to describe it. Pick up a stick, your remote control, anything that you can pretend or mime as a weapon. Take a fake lunge or a swing at an imaginary enemy in front of you. Keep in mind, you don't want to overbalance yourself and fall over. Now, how far did you move? I'll do it right now, okay? Here we are. I've picked up my TV remote control. I'm going to take a lunge at an imaginary enemy. Whoa! I moved let's say 4 feet. Roughly something like that, okay? Now, this will vary from person to person, if you're tall, if you're short, lots of things like that. But if you aren't wearing roller skates, you're probably not going to move 10 feet from taking a step, a lunge. And that's really how it works in Lords of the Fallen. Everything is janky and floaty. Players and enemies will slide around where they are supposed to be. You can see an enemy start up his attack, move his feet, then his feet will stop moving and he will slide like 7 feet towards you because that's where you are and that's where he needs to be to attack you. I don't know why this is. I can only imagine it's because they have animations, maybe mocapped ones, but they don't move in the way that they should be moving. So everyone just slides around the world. When you roll, you will move like 3,000 meters. For some reason, it doesn't feel good. See, the human brain is pretty good at working things out. If I make the motion of throwing something at you, your brain will sort of work out and calculate what's going to happen so you have a good idea of what's gonna follow. Even if your eyes can't follow the speed of what I threw at you per se, your brain's reasoning and anticipation of events will help you catch it along with muscle memory. All of that goes completely out the window when momentum and inertia are mere suggestions, and entities in Lords 23 will slip-slide around with no rhyme nor reason. It feels bad on player characters, and it's just plain frustrating when you try and gauge the space between you and an enemy, which, you know, that's kind of a big thing of these 3D lock-on combat games, is spacing and positioning. It doesn't matter when an enemy can infinitely slide towards you, so that they will guarantee their attack to land where you are at that particular moment in time. Beyond this, the game is designed in many areas to be obnoxious. Take one example. There was an item I wanted to reach. It involved, from the bonfire, running past an area I'd already cleared out that was off to the side, but the enemies in there would 100% aggro on me every time, even though they're facing the other way, so I had to deal with or run past 3 dog enemies. Sometimes, inconsistently, another enemy in there, who would sometimes aggro, sometimes wouldn't. Then I'd need to slip past to fight a big group of enemies, including a strong standard enemy. Then I need to enter the spooky world, jump down or climb down a ladder, all whilst having an enemy down there shooting homing projectiles, which are nigh unavoidable if you take the ladder. So you jump down. Once down there, you'll be dealing with 2 enemies shooting projectiles, 2 strong moth enemies that can indefinitely spawn weaker enemies and have a very poorly telegraphed grab move, as well as projectiles, and AoE blasts, and an infinitely spawning standard enemy because you're in the spooky world, all whilst on a very small platform whilst dealing with your character sliding and rolling around all over the place. It's just an effort in frustration more than anything actually challenging that you can take some sort of measured approach to. The movement in the game is just a nightmare if you're on anything with a ledge, and a lot of the game's parts have very narrow areas to fight on. Then there's the game balance. Whilst you have strength, dex, holy and fire and umbral magics, things seem heavily weighted towards certain builds just being way better than others. My friend Doug was using an umbral build, and he could effectively shoot an infinite number of this very powerful AoE spell because he had an item that made it drain his health instead, but he would immediately get that health back upon using it. You have, like, throwing javelins, which do, say, this much damage, but then you get throwing hatchets that do 3 times as much damage whilst having the same cost. So it's like, what's the point? Why would you use one when the other thing is just 100% better in every way? And whilst there are quite a lot of weapons, every weapon in a category pretty much has the same moveset. All the swords have the same moves, all the spears have the same moves. This balance extends to other areas too, such as the level design. I've seen people heaping praise on this, seemingly I assume because of the 2 worlds thing, but I don't understand why. The game is full of shortcuts that serve virtually no purpose. They took the open-ended small area design from Dark Souls, where, you know, you unlock shortcuts and things, but 8 out of 10 times those shortcuts are pointless. It's like, oh, now I have a shortcut back here, but I don't need to go back here. I would never need to use this shortcut. bizarrely placed checkpoints or bonfires. At one area, for example, I had to proceed through 3 bosses before I found a big bonfire. Later on, I went through 3 bonfires with no bosses. When I did find a boss, it had a mini checkpoint right outside it, and another one inside the room, and then another one up an elevator that was in that room. Eh? Because yes, this game has big bonfires and little ones that you can make, but you can only have one little one at a time. And this kind of just screws things up in my opinion. They took that cut gameplay mechanic from Dark Souls 3 where you could make bonfires. Frankly, I think it was cut for a reason, as it just doesn't work well in practice. Lords 23 bugged out on me quite a few times. The worst of these was that the game refused to unlock one of the big bonfires for me. No matter how many times I ran to it, touched it, leveled up at it, interacted with it, I couldn't travel to it. And I know you're meant to, because my friend could. Which meant I had to run to that bonfire every single time. And that was one of the main ones. That was like after a big boss. I also had bizarre experiences where I would try and quit to the main menu, and instead it would load me into a co-op session, immediately disconnect me, and then put me in the character creation menu. On top of that, there's the performance. Oh, and I've seen people online, I've seen developers saying, make sure you have the latest drivers, make sure you have a good graphics card. Yeah, I'm running the game on the latest drivers with a 4070 Ti, even with the game on minimum settings with DLSS set to ultra performance. There are areas in this game where I can go down to 25 FPS, which is proof of some weird-ass problems going on, which I think might have something to do with shaders being compiled, if I had to guess. See, there's one area, I went through it the first time, and I had to go through it again because I was going through in co-op. The first time, the frame rate was absolutely terrible. The second time, it was fairly fine. Because when this game is working, I can have it, on all maxed out ultra settings, 60 FPS. That's with me capping the FPS to 60, because as mentioned in other videos, if I'm recording a game, I generally cap it to 60 FPS because my video is going to be 60 FPS, and that's just how I like to do it. And another issue, which isn't a huge problem, but it's certainly a tedious one, due to the way co-op works, you have to play through the game twice if you're playing with a friend, because progression isn't saved. You can pick up boss items, and you can get enemy items, but you can't pick up world items like keys, and you can't talk to NPCs or make progress. So it's kind of annoying. In my opinion, if you're using the beckon friend option, I don't see why progress can't be shared for both players at that point. You might be wondering, why have I not touched about the story? Because, frankly, the story and voice acting are pretty bad, in my opinion. Feels nothing more than an extremely meager attempt at aping Dark Souls style of presentation, storytelling, world and character building, let down by, frankly, pretty poor performances and just janky versions of things you've already seen in Dark Souls. There's one boss in particular, I don't remember the name, but it was basically 100% copying Lothric and Lorien from Dark Souls 3. Like, shamelessly copying it, frankly. But yeah, the voice acting, sometimes it feels like the voice actors don't understand the words they are saying. Sometimes they're spliced together poorly, so a boss will be saying, not a boss, a character will be saying like, I feel kind of upset at the moment. It's like, what? Your tone completely shifted between one line and the next, like mid-sentence. The story, I didn't pay any attention to it because it's just kind of generic. Bad guy come back. Touch red lights, stop bad guy. Don't touch red lights. Bad guy's not a bad guy? Question mark? To compare with Lies of P, I gave that game a 7 out of 10 because despite it having some very annoying issues, the gameplay, for the most part, was pretty solid. The weapons were unique and distinct from one another. They nailed their imitation of Dark Souls presentation with cutscenes and storytelling. The voice acting was definitely pretty janky in Lies of P, but the whole way it was all presented felt very accurate to what they were going for, even if it was still an imitation. Lords of the Fallen is a poor imitation, which doesn't capture what they're going for. So in summary, I think Lords of the Fallen is a 5 out of 10 game. Maybe a 6 out of 10, because if you play co-op, it's a lot easier to have a good time because you'll be spending it with a friend. And the game does have a nice, large, varied selection of levels, even if none of them really stand out in terms of exploration or visuals. But if you want a dungeon delving, action RPG Souls clone to play with a friend, you'll get some fun out of this one. In a way, even though Lies of P is a better game, if you ask me, I think you would be better off getting Lords of the Fallen because co-op means it's more fun. And that's really what matters at the end of the day, right? Sometimes quality isn't as important as enjoyability. Because yeah, Lies of the P is better in almost every area, even with its own flaws. But if you want a proper Souls clone that doesn't just ape Souls, but builds on it, just play Neo or Neo 2. Those have co-op as well. Can I recommend this game? If you want a new Souls experience, you have a friend willing to play with you, yeah, I think you'll have some fun. Frankly, I think this game is somewhat high effort, but low quality in the areas that really matter. I can see where they tried with this game. It doesn't feel like they were lazy, it just feels like they weren't really as competent as they could have been. The graphics are nice, but the gameplay is bleh. And gameplay is what matters to me. I'll take that over visuals every day. I'll take an ugly looking Demon Souls or a Dark Souls where they have the art style carrying it with really kind of janky graphics but good gameplay, you know? But thanks so much for watching. See you next time.